Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Marines Memorial Association, I would like to welcome you to our tonight's program. Our salute to the Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans. This is our fourth year holding this special event, and we're thrilled to do so again this evening. Our guest speaker tonight is General Jim Mattis, United States Marine Corps retired. The former... I know that's all for me, so I appreciate it. You can keep on doing that. Our speaker tonight, I'll do that again. No, seriously, the former commander of the U.S. Central Command and currently the Annenberg Distinguished Visiting Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford. In a little while, the general will speak, and then he'll take some questions submitted by you. Afterward, we'll gather on the 10th floor for a wine reception. My name's Frank Pulley. I'm a retired Marine Sergeant Major who is, now that is for me, who was blessed and honored to serve over 30 years in our beloved Corps, retiring in 2008. My last assignment was as a Sergeant Major of the 1st Marine Division, the Blue Diamond, the oldest, largest, most decorated division in our Corps. I now proudly serve as a West Coast area representative of the Marine Corps Association, and I'm extremely fortunate and humbled to serve as the current board secretary for the Marines Memorial Association on the board, Memorial Board of Directors. I see Mr. Barry Graham, our chairman of the board, here this evening, as well as other board members that are here tonight. Some are probably wondering who's that handsome bearded guy up on the stage. Well, it's me, so now y'all can talk about me gaining some hair advice, losing it all the time. Speaking of our board, in all sincerity, sadly we lost one of our esteemed members, Mr. Eddie LeBaron, who passed away on the 1st of April. Eddie was a professional quarterback, a Korea War veteran, and when he was in the NFL, because of his size, 5'7", fairly diminutive by NFL standards, if you will, and his heroics in Korea, he was referred to as the Little General. We knew him to be a giant of a man and a wonderful human being, and who will not soon be forgotten. Rest in peace, Eddie. Your proud legacy lives on, sir. When asked to moderate tonight's event, I immediately jumped at the opportunity. I did ask General Myatt, the President and CEO of our Marines Memorial, and please give me a round of applause. Join me in a round of applause for General Myatt. Thank you. Being a senior enlisted leader and advisor, I did ask the general if he thought that was a good idea. He may be taking an unnecessary risk by having a retired Sergeant Major front and center in front of a captive audience, media, video, no clock in sight. And so what the general never misses a beat. He said, no worries, Sergeant Major. I'll be sitting front and center, front row to keep you in check. And oh, by the way, you may not want to keep General Mattis waiting too long. So, sir, it's a pleasure to be in your company. Again, thanks for your leadership and your fine examples, General. It's always great to be here with you, sir. Before we begin, a quick word about the Marines Memorial Association, or Marines Memorial. We're a nonprofit veterans organization. We were chartered in 1946 by our 18th Commandant, General Alexander Archer Vandergrift. And our charter was to honor the memory and to commemorate the valor of members of the United States Armed Forces who were killed, lost, or died in military service for their country. And among its list of duties, the association is responsible for maintaining this Marines Memorial Club as a living memorial to those who've gone before and to pay tribute to those who carry on. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here this evening. At this time, I respectfully request all those who've wore the cloth of our nation and supported and defended our Constitution of the United States, if you can, to please stand. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm round of applause. Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you. Please take a moment to turn off all electronic devices, cell phones, smartphones, dumb phones, down phones, iPhones, iPads, iPods, iPads, Androids, all those noise-making devices. I also encourage you to make use of the question cards that have been provided in your programs. Please write down your questions as soon as possible and hand pass them down the aisle. One of the staff members will pick them up and we'll ask some of the questions later. Now, it's my distinct pleasure and honor to talk about this evening's distinguished guest. I say talk about because General Jim Mattis needs no formal introduction. He's one of our nation's most combat experienced and revered general officers, revered Marines. As I shared, he needs no formal introduction, and I know the general well enough that the last thing he wants me to do is to stand here and recite his bio. Now, his bio is in your program, and please read it at your leisure. I would like to share a few things about the general that's not captured in his bio. I had the honor and pleasure of serving with General Mattis when he was the CG of 1MEF, and I was a Sergeant Major of 1st Marine Division. serving with then Major General John Paxton, who, as we know, is now our Corps' Assistant Commandant. I heard he got selected as Assistant Commandant because he had served with me both at MCRD and at 1st Marine Division. Quite the contrary, he got selected in spite of having served with me on 2 separate occasions. Before General Mattis arrived back to the West Coast, there was a lot of talk about him. His quotes, the changes he would make, tentative personnel moves, some of them do include sergeants major. So as you can imagine, there was some apprehension, tension, stressed, angst, some even said chaos, you name it. I soon learned that chaos stood for Colonel has another outstanding solution. I also learned that the CG simply expected all leaders, demanded all leaders and all Marines to take care of each other, our Corps, and our country, and that he had zero tolerance for those that did not. Theodore Roosevelt once wrote that no one cares how much you know till they know how much you care. And retired Marine and Medal of Honor recipient Colonel Wesley Fox wrote a book, 6 Essential Elements of Leadership, and said that it's care, personality, knowledge, motivation, and communication that makes an effective leader. Now, ladies and gentlemen, much has been written about General Mattis's personality, his knowledge, his motivation, and his communication. What I learned and respect and admire most is truly how much he genuinely cares. I saw it in garrison at One Melf at Camp Pendleton. I saw it and witnessed it firsthand during a visit to Iraq in 2006. Yes, mission accomplishment remains first, but like most effective leaders, he cared about his Marines, especially junior personnel. I see General Mattis as the epitome of a truly consummate servant leader. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm round of applause in welcoming General Jim Mattis. Always a pleasure. Thanks, sir. Thanks, sir.
Thanks, Sergeant Major Pulley. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much. That was pretty wonderful. He must have called my mother to get some of that. I could not have been introduced so genuinely, frankly, so wonderfully, without some kind of motherly input, I don't think. But Sergeant Major's a Marine's Marine. It's an honor to be introduced by someone with his background. I did notice he's wearing a beard this year, and reminded him we were shooting people like that a short time ago. Reminding him that generals don't have stress, they create it. But General Myatt, thanks for having, again this year, a salute to the veterans we owe so much to. Who would have believed, sir, that what you taught me some 25 years ago, the enemy would pay a price for a few more decades as a result. So thanks very much for your leadership. I've never thanked a man before in public who sent me into 2 minefields. But I have to break with tradition tonight because I love this man. But we gather tonight in one of the world's most vibrant cities anywhere, and at one of the most perfect venues, which is this club, perfectly located downtown in San Francisco. It's a jewel in the heart of this city, especially with its dynamism that it's got today. And I would just tell you too, Diane and John, the Gold Star parents who join us here, it's also your home as much as it is for the Marines, for the veterans, and for everyone. It's a great mixing place for everyone to get together. It's a place where you can kindle new friendships, you can rekindle old ones, and it's really a wonderful place to dig out new fields for challenge for our energies. Ladies and gentlemen, I was asked to speak tonight about our military service when we were on active duty, and as veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan have some understandable questions about what was it all about as they watch the news, and talk too about how we take our past role and move forward. And since it was my former division commander, that guy who sent me into 2 minefields once before, I didn't want to take any chances and change the subject matter, not knowing quite what he would do to me tonight if I did. So I'll speak for a bit to that, and I want to speak in the most persuasive terms possible about the value of your service. And then we'll go to the question and answer, and we'll get into that with the usual level of veterans and San Francisco people's candor. Next month, our nation's going to pause, and it's going to recognize Veterans Day, a day when our nation collectively remembers that our freedoms did not come free of charge. There was nothing free to it. From our first days, they were bought, those freedoms, with the blood of our patriots, the blood of those citizens who put country ahead of self. Yet for many people gathered here this evening, every day seems like Memorial Day, especially for those of us who feel privileged to have these bonus days we live now following our years in uniform. And these are bonus days that too many of our comrades killed in action did not get the chance to live. Memories of our time overseas remains with us, recalling to mind ourselves and our comrades when we were younger, and we're willing to give our all for this country, and especially for our buddies. These memories are often frequent if unbidden. You may be home for the holidays and you hear duck hunters shoot in the distance. And for just a minute, you glance over to see if your lieutenant or your squad leader's coming with that kind of alertness that means grab your gear. And then you hear your family's voices in the background and you relax, smiling to yourself, and you rejoin their conversation as if nothing happened. In my case, it's natural too, ladies and gentlemen, when I think of veterans, to think of our country, because they are inextricably linked in my heart and in my mind. For veterans as a group are unapologetic about the values that were given voice in our young country's Declaration of Independence. And those values that grew out of the Enlightenment, that were inscribed in a constitution that the veterans here in this room tonight swore on oath to defend with their very lives. Our country gives hope to millions around the world. If you don't believe it, just look at the number clamoring to get in, legally or illegally. They want to get here. And yet you, who knew at one time your job was to fight well, you're the ones who kept that hope alive. And you, who with your buddies held steadfast, believing in something larger than yourselves, and proved it in the midst of many firefights. By your service, you made clear your choice about what kind of world we want for our nation and for our children. Is it the world of violent jihadist terrorists, or is it one defined by Abraham Lincoln when he advised us to listen to our better angels? I searched for words tonight, ladies and gentlemen, to pay my respects to all of you here tonight, veterans and non-veterans. I had to turn to others more articulate than myself so I could convey what I thought our service meant. Someone once said our country is like a bank. If you want to take something out, you have to put something in. For the veterans of the Iraq and Afghan wars, of these very poorly explained and inconclusive wars, of the first major wars that we have fought in our country's history, without a draft forcing some men into the ranks, it's understandable that the question of our service and what it meant may loom very large in our minds, for you most assuredly put something in to our country's moral bank. I'm no smarter than you young men and women. I just have a few more gray hairs than you wonderful young men and women who fought, but I do want you to rest assured that by your service, you sent a very necessary message to the world, and especially to those maniacs who thought on 9/11 that by hurting us, they could scare us. As President Reagan said so well, freedom is only one generation away from extinction. It must be fought for and defended by each generation. And you who stood tall in the first years of this new century, you proved yourselves worthy successors to the line of veterans stretching from Bunker Hill to Shiloh, to Belleau Wood, to Iwo, Chosin Reservoir, Khe Sanh, and so many other battles. You proved that today's Americans are not made of cotton candy. From Fallujah to the Helmand, from Kandahar to the Hindu Kush, from the waters of the Persian Gulf to the air overhead, the skies overhead the battlefield, you demonstrated to the world America's awesome determination to defend herself and preserve her freedoms. There are no granite monuments in our nation's capital or in San Francisco or anywhere else across our land, regardless of how grandly built, that can take the place of your raw example of courage. When in your youth you answered your country's call, when you looked past the hot political rhetoric, and you voluntarily left behind life's well-lit avenues and signed a blank check to the American people payable with your lives. And most importantly, when you made a full personal commitment, even while for over a dozen years our political leadership had difficulty defining our national level of commitment. You veterans built your own monument with a soldier's faith, embracing an unlimited liability cause and showing our younger generation at its very best when the times were at their worst. And I think most of us are old enough to remember what it was like the day after 9/11. Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., Jr. arguably was the most articulate Associate Justice in the history of the Supreme Court. He himself was a combat-experienced infantry officer in our awful Civil War. He said, "As life is action and passion, it is required of a man that he should share the passion and action of his time at peril of being judged not to have lived." You, my fine veterans, are privileged that you will never face a judgment of having failed to live fully. For you young patriots were more concerned with living life fully than in your own longevity and freely facing daunting odds and facing the random nature of death and wounds on the battlefield. So long as you maintain that same commitment to others, that same enthusiasm for life's challenges that you felt in yourself, your shipmates, your comrades, and your buddies, you will never question at age 45 laying on a shrink's couch whether or not you have lived. Veterans know the difference between being in a dangerous combat zone and being in close combat seeking out and killing the enemy. Close combat is tough. Much of the rest of war is boring, if hard work. Yet nothing is mentally crippling about hard work in dangerous circumstances, as shown by generations of American veterans who thankfully came home as better men and women. Close combat, however, is an incommunicable experience, again quoting Oliver Wendell Holmes. And a fellow Civil War officer, a friend of his, spoke at the end of the war of war's effects, distinguishing the impact of close combat from military service in general. He said, "Such combat is a test of character, making bad men worse and good men better." We are masters of our character, and we choose what we're going to stand for in this life. Veterans today have had a unique privilege, that of seeing the tenacious spirit of our lads, like those young grunts preparing for a patrol, by loosely wrapping tourniquets on their limbs so they could swiftly stop their own bleeding if their legs were blown off. Yet day after day, they stoically patrolled, and adversity, we are reminded, reveals a man to himself. Those young patriots coming home from such patrols are worth more than all the gold in Fort Knox, for nothing they can face again will ever be that tough. You are all now stronger for what you faced while focusing not on yourselves, but on your buddies and keeping them alive. Again, Oliver Wendell Holmes' words come to mind. He says, "It was given to us at a very young age to learn at the outset that life is a profound and passionate thing." Well, ladies and gentlemen, that veteran officer would be comfortable sitting here tonight in the company of our veterans. For together, you are imbued with a kinship born of the fight. And in the service, we found life is more precious, I think, than ever. And certainly we found life a profound and passionate thing. We can choose to recall this life-changing memory as we strive to live better lives. And thanks to the sense of gratitude we now choose to carry with us, thankful for every day and what remains still the best hope on earth, and that's America. Now, most of us lost friends, and they were the best of friends, and we learned war's glory lay only in our friends. There is no other glory in war. They were friends who proved their manhood at age 18 before they could legally drink a beer. Legally, I said. They were young men and women taking responsibility for their own actions and never playing the victim card. Rather, they took responsibility for their own reaction to adversity. This was something that we once took for granted, in ourselves and in our buddies when we were in the ranks. Units where teenagers naturally stood tall and we counted on each other. Yet it's a characteristic that can seem oddly vacant in our post-military society where victimhood often seems to be celebrated. We found in the ranks we were all co-equal, whether we were a general or a private, whether we were admiral or a seaman. We were equally committed to the mission, and more importantly, we were equally committed to each other, a thought captured by General Robert E. Lee, saying his spirit bled each time one of his men fell. Looking back over my own service, I realize how fortunate I was to experience all this, the many riotous excursions I had when I was privileged to march or fight alongside you. And a question does come to my mind. What can I do to repay our country for the privilege I was granted to learn things that only you in this room could have taught me? For today, I feel sorry for those who were not there with us when trouble loomed. And I sometimes wonder how to embrace those Americans who were not with us, who were not so fortunate to discover what we were privileged to learn when we were young, and we learned that it would strengthen us for all the rest of our lives. When we were receiving our masters and PhDs in how to live life and gaining understanding and appreciation of small things that we would otherwise have never known. How do we embrace our fellow citizens who weren't there? For America is too large at heart for divisions between us. If we became keenly aware of anything at war, it was what is printed on our coins, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. We veterans did our patriotic duty, nothing more, certainly nothing less. And we need to come home like veterans of all America's wars, come home stronger and more compassionate, not characterized as damaged or with disorders or syndromes or other disease labels, not labeled dependent on the government, even as we take the lead in the care of our grievously wounded comrades and hold our Gold Star families close in our hearts. We deserve nothing more than a level playing field when we come home to America, for we endured nothing more and often less than veterans of past wars. Those veterans came home to contribute the sorts of leadership that I see here routinely in the Bay Area by so many of you veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, as you bring your character and drive honed in adversity to your families, to your classrooms, your businesses, your school districts, community organizations, churches, neighborhoods, and more. For whatever trauma came with service in tough circumstances, we should take what we learned, take our post-traumatic growth, and like past generations coming home, bring our sharpened strengths to bear, bring our attitude of gratitude to bear. And most importantly, denying cynicism a role in our view of the world. For we know that even in the worst circumstances that together we faced, cynicism would have been nothing more than absolving ourselves of responsibility for changing our own attitude. That in tough times, cynicism is just another way to give up. And in the military, we consider cynicism or giving up simply as forms of cowardice. No matter how bad any situation, cynicism has no positive impact on it. Watching the news, cynicism and victimhood often seem to go hand in hand today, but not for us veterans. People who have faced no harsh trials seem to fall into that mode unaware of what it indicates when taking refuge from responsibility for their actions. This is an area where your veterans' example can help our society rediscover its courage and its optimism, vice taking refuge in victimhood. For whether overseas or in a bar fight here at home, we always knew that if we were in trouble, our buddies would come to our aid, no matter the odds against them. We also learned the pleasure of exceeding expectations. We saw the power we brought when working together as a team, and we know the truth of the Eagles' words in the song they sang, Desperado, that prison would be walking through this world all alone. We learned alongside each other in teams where admired leadership built teamwork. There, free men and free women could change the world and that we would never be alone. Now, having seen the moonshine on the other side of the world and worked with others of many cultures, having worked in one of the most diverse teams on earth, that of the U.S. military, having faced down grim circumstances and not lost our sense of humor or our moral balance under those conditions where war's grim realities scrape away civilization's veneer on each of us, we have learned that nothing can stop our spirit unless we ignore Lincoln's call to our better angels. American colleges and businesses know your pedigree for commitment, for reliability, and for loyalty. This is why so many corporations and startups aggressively recruit veterans. For as San Francisco-based Uber sums it up, veterans deliver higher value. Bellwether companies out here on the West Coast in particular, those like Microsoft, Uber, Starbucks, and more, they act on that premise, as do some of our finest colleges and universities that want more veterans on their campuses. So for you veterans, those I was humbled to serve alongside, I will close with words, again paraphrased or borrowed directly from others. From Dumas, he said, "You should be satisfied with the way you have conducted yourselves, without remorse for the past, confident in the present, and full of hope for the future. When you retire to bed, you should sleep the sleep of the brave. And as you look with hope toward the future, recall how some people define success." I think it was Robert Louis Stevenson, but I'm not sure of that. He said, or someone said, that man is a success, and I'd say man or woman, who has lived well, laughed often, and loved much. That should be your map, veterans. And if Jackie Robinson, a sparkling ball player from California and himself a veteran of World War II, could write his own epitaph on leadership and put it this way, then you can understand why you have a great role model in many of the veterans from the greatest generation. Jackie Robinson said, "A life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives." Then you veterans who are so fortunate as to have learned so much, living in the greatest country on earth while making an impact on so many lives when you were so young, you should recognize our country needs your vigor and wisdom gained at great cost of our comrades and Gold Star families who need to see their son spirits live on in your enthusiasm for life. You have made an enormous impact as veterans, and I'm confident you'll make an even bigger dent in the universe in the near future as you bring your leadership to bear. I imagine you have questions for me, so I'm going to quit my prepared remarks with a quote from General Sherman when bidding farewell to his army in 1865. He very simply put it, "As in war you have been good soldiers, so in peace you will be good citizens." Remember, in the military, you learned the joy of giving 100% and the enormous energy you gain from living fully. Keep it up. Your families, your communities, your country need that sort of leadership by example. And like General Sherman, I'm confident that you will be very good citizens indeed, because you have lived through uncertainty, you have been tested, and you've not been found wanting. Well, thank you to all the veterans, and Semper Fi to you. It's been an absolute privilege, a humbling privilege, to stick around so long that every time I got you in a jam, you got me out of it, and that was a good many times. So thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, veterans. Thanks. Okay, I think Sergeant Major's got some questions. So now comes the examination. We'll see how I do here.
First question we got this evening, General, is in your opinion, has ISIL or ISIS undone what we've accomplished in the Western Iraq? And in your opinion, what should our strategy be to defeat ISIS?
Yeah, ISIS, ladies and gentlemen, is just the latest manifestation of the regional warfare and the fundamentalist strains. This one, remember, comes from the Sunni side. It's good to fall back a little bit here and remember there's two fundamental groups of violent jihadists who have declared war on America. First one declared war on America in 1983, blew up our embassy in Beirut, blew up the French paratrooper barracks, the U.S. Marine barracks. Lebanese Hezbollah is how you know them. They have been untouched by our counterterrorism campaign, supported out of Iran. As recently as a couple years ago, they murdered Israeli tourists in Bulgaria. 2 years ago, they tried to murder the Saudi Arabian ambassador 2 miles from the White House, believe it or not. That's one brand, that's the Shia brand. About 10, 12 years later, the Sunni brand declared war on America. You know them as Al-Qaeda and associated movements. And ISIS is simply a more barbaric form of both Lebanese Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda on steroids. I mean, that's basically what they come down to. I believe that ISIS can be defeated. It's a matter of political will. It's a matter of the Sunnis joining in the fight alongside the Iraqis. It's not that difficult to get them, but it does take a concerted political coalition that then musters the necessary political will and the military strength. Obviously, it's going to take a ground force to do it. You don't take out enemies like this with air alone, and so we're going to have to, support the countervailing forces and make certain that they know they can count on us. That doesn't mean putting 100,000 troops back on the ground out there. That's not what it takes. But at the same time, we're going to have to take our own side in the fight. Right now, some of our friends are perplexed and disappointed in us, and some of our enemies are rather scornful, and that has to change. But remember, in the Middle East, we've got a lot of friends in the Middle East. I'll give you an example. I was meeting with the leader of one country, the King of Jordan, and we were dealing on one issue, and when he got done, he said, I understand that the French and the British had to pull their troops out of Afghanistan. I said, yes, Your Majesty, that's happened for domestic political reasons. And he said, well, let me make it clear. He said, we will have Jordanian soldiers alongside American soldiers in Afghanistan until the last American soldier comes home. We have friends in that part of the world that are quite capable of taking this enemy on if we stand with them in their time of peril, just like they've stood with us when we needed them to be with us. And there's more out there like that. So what we really need to do is send a degree of confidence through these others who want to fight them, who are scared to death of them, frankly. And remember, they started this fight. Some people want to say it's President Obama's messed it up or President Bush messed it up. The enemy started the fight, and neither one of them were in office when this started.
Hey, thanks so much, General. Sir, in your opinion, tagging on that, if you will, what's a greater threat, ISIS or Iran?
Yeah, okay, the Sunni jihadists, ISIS, al-Nusra, those are in Syria and Iraq. You've got Boko Haram, as you know, down in Nigeria, Mali, that area. You've also got Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. You've got Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen, who are taking advantage of the chaos there right now. That's the most dangerous part of Al-Qaeda. That's targeted right on the United States. They tried to bring down the airliner over Detroit. I can go on. You see a kind of a franchising by the Al-Qaeda element here. In other words, we've shredded their senior leadership up in the Pakistan-Afghanistan border area. A lot of them are not going to collect their 401k programs, bottom line. But at the same time, it has franchised, it has mutated as any fight like this going on for a long period does. And so it is a serious threat. That said, I believe that Iran, being a state sponsor of terrorism, and what they've tried to do. I mean, can you imagine a nation deciding they're going to try and set off a bomb at Cafe Milano in downtown Georgetown, Washington, D.C. on a Saturday night to kill the Arab ambassador? Ambassadors are men and women of peace, and it gives you an idea of why many nations are very concerned about any nuclear agreement with Iran that allows them to continue that program at any level. And you've got to deal with reality, and I think the American government is trying to deal with that reality of trying to slow them down and to stop them. But there are some people who think that any approach that allows them to have enriched fissile material beyond what a peaceful program requires, and that is what they've been doing, that would only embolden them to do even worse than trying to kill an ambassador in downtown Washington, D.C. So I think Iran is the larger issue in the long term, but that does not say that al-Qaeda gets a pass. They are still plenty dangerous. It's a reality of the world. If you think back of the American West and how it took 50-odd years and something that we're not all that proud of in terms of our treatment of Native Americans, but you think of all the skirmishing that went on out here between the time of the California gold rush in 1905, it's probably going to be a bit like that against these kind of enemy. Many, many skirmishes over many decades as we deal with both of them. You can't ignore either one.
Hey, thanks, General. Mixing up a little bit, you and I spoke a little bit earlier this evening about this, sir, to some degree. In your opinion, does our all-volunteer service work? It's a three-part question, sir. And do we as a nation have enough skin in the game? And what's your opinion on a draft?
Yeah. You know, I've been asked this a number of times, especially down where I work on the Stanford campus with some of you. And I think that the all-volunteer concept has been great for the U.S. military. When I first came in, we had draftees. They were good Marines. But I will tell you that having everyone there because they want to be there is an asset. Just think of running your own companies, your own schools, whatever business you're in. You want people beside you who want to be there. It's understandable. I think for the country, I think it's been bad. I think we've lost the sense of service, and I'm not saying everyone has to serve in the military, but again, going back to the remarks I made earlier, that a country is like a bank. If you want to get something out of it, you got to put something in, and that doesn't mean you put something in for me and I take a free ride. It means we all put our shoulder to the wagon and help get it up the hill. And it's one of the reasons I think why veterans have such a high level of affection from the American people, because they recognize that when you sign that unlimited liability clause that says, I'll put my life on the line and it's payable with my life, I think that sends a message of we're in this together. And I think we've lost a lot of that in the country, and I don't frankly have a good solution, because I know we don't need to create a military 5 times as big with people who don't want to be there. But I think it's something we've got to look at. Are there ways that we say everybody has to do something for a year when they come out of high school? I mean, it shocked. I had a young lady who just couldn't believe it at a class down in Stanford that at age 18 I was going to get drafted. I mean, she just couldn't comprehend that the government could force you into the U.S. military. It's that alien to the young people who grow up today. And so, unfortunately, I think also alien is the sense of doing something for the less, you know, for Peace Corps, for VISTA. There's got to be a way where we all pitch in.
Yes, sir, thank you. Mm-hmm. Sir, we also touched on this a little bit earlier as well. Is it, in your opinion, should we open infantry and special forces combat jobs and roles to women?
Yeah, you know, if the most articulate Associate Justice in the history of the Supreme Court says that talking to veterans some 20 years after the Civil War that we have shared an incommunicable experience, if the most articulate Associate Justice has a hard time explaining what close combat, what we call intimate killing, is like for those who go into it, I have a very difficult time. Military service is a touchstone for any patriot, male or female. It doesn't matter. We turn down an awful lot of people every year who can't even qualify, who want to come into the military. And our women in the service have not been good in this last decade of war. They've been magnificent. But that said, there is a level of atavistic behavior. There is a reward for the most crude kind of commitment, and it is a level of primitive living that it is difficult to explain. And I'm not just talking about the lack of privacy for the most basic bodily functions, total lack of privacy. I'm talking about why you would not require Stanford's football team to be 50% female because we want to make certain we have upward mobility for the girls on the campus. I mean, exactly, we would laugh at that. but we take football more seriously than national defense, so don't worry, we're not going to do that, Stanford. But the point is, a lot of warfare too is how does the enemy view you? There are very few enemy. I mean, we read their mail. There are very few enemy that want to meet U.S. Marines. We read their mail before the attack going into Iraq, and they knew they drew the short straw when they found who they were going to be fighting, and they didn't like it. But my point is that this is part of sending a message of again, America's awesome determination to defend herself. And when you have to reduce standards, as you would have to do, you would have to do it. And when you would mix, when you mix eros, when you mix affection for one another that could be manifested sexually, I don't care if you go anywhere in history, you will not find where this has worked. Never has it worked. King David, if you go back to the Bible, King David sent one of his officers off to fight so he could go to bed with his wife. It's right in the Bible. We have had numerous cases as we put healthy young men and women together, and we expect them to act like little saints when we put them under very difficult conditions. And even respect for their sexuality, which is still developing at age 18, 19, 20. Remember how the infantry got its name? Infant soldier, young soldier. I mean, I have been through platoons where you wouldn't find more than a handful of people over the age of 21, and that's 40 Marines. And you're going to insert into that, I mean, remember that a king of England gave up his throne so he could marry a woman he fell in love with. I mean, if a king will give up his throne, can you imagine introducing that sort of affection, that sort of drive among very young people? I just think it shows a lack of respect, it shows a lack of historical understanding, and it weakens the infantry. I don't think you can do it. And I say that somewhat reluctantly because I like having anything open to anybody, but in this case, now I've only got 40 years in the infantry, so maybe there's someone who's got more time. Sorry, May?
Hey, thanks, sir. Just a couple more questions, General.
Sure.
Earlier, you touched on your remarks about post-traumatic growth in the veterans, not damaged goods, et cetera.
Yeah.
What would you advise employers who are uncertain about hiring our nation's veterans?
Yeah, on employers, I go around, I'm on a couple of boards, and I get to meet a lot of interesting people. And the reason I mentioned Uber here, one, because it's a San Francisco company, but I'm on their military advisory board. And I was talking to their hiring people. I said, why is it that you want veterans? Why are you so aggressively going after them? And I heard the same thing that I heard when I was up in Seattle talking to some people who run companies that you're all familiar with. They said they bring higher value. And then they showed it to me objectively how they bring higher value. And I think that when you can quantify the qualitative, the subjective character of people in a way that these companies have, I don't see them in any way reluctant to bring military veterans on board. I think that if I was to do something crazy up here tonight, most of the guys in here who serve with me say, yeah, he's just acting crazy. But the news might say, well, I think he's got post-traumatic stress syndrome. No, I'm just crazy, ladies and gentlemen. just having a good time. My point is we've become so serious about this that there's an allied country where when the troops come home, they're shown a movie and it says, it's okay to be okay. Now think of that. Think that we have got such a fixation on disease or disorder that troops coming home actually have to be told, you don't have to be messed up. I mean, what is the message we're sending them? Now, don't get me wrong, it's not an insignificant moment the first time you draw down and you shoot somebody. But the percentage of veterans who actually were engaged in that level of combat is very small. And it's mostly confined, obviously, to the Army and the Marines. And even in those units, in those organizations, it's a minority. And there, they can get through that. I mean, a guy like Oliver Wendell Holmes doesn't go up to be a justice of the Supreme Court, or Dwight D. Eisenhower doesn't go up to be the president of the country. And how many people raised good families, contributed to their communities? I just don't see this as operant, although I read a lot about it, in the media. And it needs to be addressed, because what my concern is we've got so many people who think they're messed up now, or think they should be, that the ones who really need help are being submerged into a broader population. And so the ones who need the help the most aren't getting the attention they should be getting, which is why I encourage the veterans to do what you can. If you see one of your shipmates or one of your comrades, having a tough time, get them to help. There are people out there who can help. You get them a map and compass, and they find their way out of the swamp. I don't think there's any reluctance at colleges and businesses to hire veterans.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thanks, General. Yes, sir. In your remark there, you mentioned President Eisenhower. As we know, General Washington, General Grant, and General Eisenhower became presidents. Do you foresee a military general, military person ever becoming president of the United States again?
I mean, sure. We've got a lot of young veterans who are now in Congress. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, you know what's interesting? No. You young vets have always been rather fond of me, but I will assure you that the qualities that you see in me are not necessarily ones that would endear me to some other people, okay? But it's also time for young people. We need a hydraulic effort to just kind of pull up young people, and you see it in Silicon Valley, where in San Francisco Bay Area, where you start businesses. We need the same sense of devotion to this country in the political realm as we had when you joined the military. And do your homework, be respectful, but challenge people with my color hair. And I would tell you right now on Capitol Hill, many of the young men and women who are veterans are getting together for a beer at night, and they're not checking to see if they're Republican or Democrat. They're going back to that fundamental unity. And so you can do this, and you should do this. And I'm willing to talk to anyone and give what, you get to my age and you want to run the elevator down, open it up, bring you on board and say, here's what I learned. Let me take you up a couple floors, open the door, and you go out and make your own mistakes. Don't make the same ones I made. But I think that we need to see more of you young people bringing your vigor, and you need to do your homework. You need to listen to people. You can't go off and do, you don't do stupid, But at the same time, there's plenty of that being done already. So if you can get up there and move it out of the way, we need you. We need you.
Yes, sir. Last question, sir, is that we get to hear you once a year, and it's always a treat. So the question here is that, will you write a book? And if so, could you give us a preview?
Yeah, I will write, but what I'm not going to do is some tell-all. I was a naval officer for 40 years. I have no politics. I obeyed every president, and if a president decided to unilaterally send American troops into a country, and the president, by the way, I'm referring to is Bill Clinton, who sent us into Bosnia to stop the murder of innocent Muslims, then we obeyed it, or anyone else the American people voted in as our commander-in-chief. So what I'm not going to do is write a book that says I was smart and these people were dumb. I'm going to take episodes that I learned a lot, one of which will have been under General Myatt's command, and I'm going to say, here was the situation, here's what I knew, and here's what I did, and here's where it was good, and here's where it screwed things up. And I assure you, I screwed some things up. I remember on one occasion, half asleep, I led a battalion right into a mess, and you know you're not Napoleon when your mortar platoon gets out and puts up 4 mortars in the middle of the desert pointing north and 4 pointing south. You've managed to get your battalion surrounded, So I'm going to share what I learned the hard way, too. My troops later on that day said, you were just checking us, right? Just testing us, right? Don't see if we still had it, right? But I think we do owe it to you to pass on lessons, but I'm going to do it by episodes, and I'm not going to include some things where I had the catbird seat at time. I was the executive secretary to the Secretary of Defense, sitting behind 2 of them, taking notes, and then I rose to rather high levels. And so I'm going to, as we say out here in the West, I'm going to ride for the brand. I'm loyal to America, and get a couple of beers in me, and I'll tell you how brilliant I was, but otherwise I'm not going to do it. Let me take I'll take one more question. Just somebody in the audience who didn't get, if somebody in the audience who didn't get your question asked, is there one out there? Anybody want to ask a question?
I have a question, sir.
Okay.
I'm Max. I'm the creator of Terminal Lance. I just wanted to know if you had a favorite Terminal Lance comic strip, and if you read Terminal Lance at all.
Yeah, for you non-veterans or non-Marines, Lance Corporal is a very esteemed rank. I do read Terminal Lance, and I enjoy being made fun of at times in your own way. But yeah, it's a great, it just shows we got to keep our sense of humor. The grimmer things are, the more need there is for humor and keeping our respect for each other and being able to poke a little fun at each other too, I think is a great thing, and I salute you. We didn't fight for freedom of speech, not to practice it, you know what I mean? But you make fun of me again, I'm gonna kill you. Thanks, everybody.